Hello and welcome back to another full step-by-step PC build guide. We've got absolutely loads of new hardware, including the case, which is from HAVN. It's a new case manufacturer and this is their first case and it looks to be an absolute banger. It's the HAVN HS 420 and I've got the vertical GPU model. Intel have just released their Core Ultra processors and I'm going to be using their flagship U9 285K. And to go with the new processor, we've had a delivery from ASUS. We're going to be using their ROG MAXIMUS Z890 Hero motherboard, paired with their Ryujin 360 ARGB Extreme cooler. Really looking forward to getting all these parts put together, but let's make a start by taking a detailed look at this case. So right away you're going to see our case's standout feature, and it's this single tempered glass panel on the front and the side with a really tight bend in it, and this is designed to avoid distortion. So there are two versions of this case. This is the vertical GPU version. It is slightly more expensive due to the Gen 5 riser cable and vertical GPU mount, but if you get the standard version you should be able to follow along to most of this build guide. Just mounting your graphics card and fans and radiator support at the bottom is going to be slightly different. So all the panels on the front, back and side have security screws in them. So to get into the case, you're going to have to take the top panel off. Just before we remove our top panel, we'll take a look at our top I/O. So we've got a power button, we've got two USB Type-A ports, a single Type-C port, and a combined headphone and microphone jack. So to remove our top panel, we've got this tab at the back we can simply pull it up with, and then lift it away. And then if we take a look at the back of the panel that we've just removed, you'll notice we've got large perforations, and we've got this built-in mesh panel to act as a dust filter. So we take a look up top, we do have 4 screws holding our front and side tempered glass panel on. There's 2 screws holding our right side panel on and 1 screw holding our rear panel on. Now HAVN have put these screws in to make sure the panels don't come loose during shipping, but once you've built your PC, putting these screws back in is optional. So you see at the top of the case we do have some channels and Velcro straps for routing your cables. And you can see at the top of the case we do have a removable fan stroke radiator bracket. On this bracket you are going to be able to mount up to 3 120 or 3 140mm fans or up to a 420mm radiator. The bracket is held on with 2 screws at the front, and once you've removed the screws you're going to be able to slide the bracket forwards, lift it up to remove it from the case. Okay, so now we've removed the security screws at the top, we're going to be able to remove our panels. And you'll notice we do have some stickers here advising us where to grab when removing the panels. So I'm going to grab where it says, and what we're going to want to do is remove this panel in 2 steps. First thing we're going to do is lift the panel up slightly and slide it towards the front. And there is a little rail here which is going to keep the panel in place. What this has done is it allowed us now to get our hands under the tempered glass at the front. So I'm going to put a hand under here, a hand behind here, and that's going to allow me to lift the tempered glass panel away. So taking a look at our other side panel, it's a very similar design to our top panel. We've got all these large perforations with a mesh panel built in to act as a dust filter. You'll notice this panel goes all the way down to the floor, but you don't need to worry about airflow because we've got these large cutouts at the front and at the side which are going to act as your case's source of airflow. So to remove the side panel, all we need to do is simply pull it backwards from the top and then lift it up to remove it. Taking a look at our case's rear panel, again we've got a cutout at the bottom to act as a source of intake for our bottom fans. And we're also going to be able to mount 2 fans at the rear, and you can mount either 120 or 140mm fans. You can see at the bottom we have a dust filter indicating that the bottom fan is meant to be set as intake, and we've got no dust filter at the top indicating this should be set as exhaust. To remove our top panel we simply need to pull it out and then lift it up to remove it. And we'll go ahead and remove this large case accessory box. There's a cable tie at the back you need to loosen, and then we're going to be able to pull the cable tie through and remove it from the case. So orientating you in the case, your motherboard is going to go here, and the case does support motherboards up to E8X in size. If you want to go with a CPR cooler, the maximum height supported is up to 185mm, but just be careful, your graphics card is going to be mounted vertically, and a large vertically mounted graphics card is highly likely to interfere with a large tower cooler. So in terms of mounting your graphics card, we've got this vertical GPU bracket and Gen 5 riser cable included in the vertical GPU version of the case. If you get the standard version of the case, you're just going to have horizontal PCI expansion slot brackets. So you can see here we do have 4 vertical slots, and in terms of graphics card support, the maximum length supported is up to 470mm. You are going to have some flexibility in where your vertical GPU goes in terms of position between the motherboard and the tempered glass side panel. We loosen these 2 thumb screws and also a thumb screw at the rear of the case. You'll see that we now are able to adjust the position of the vertical GPU mount. So we can pull it all this way forward, and push it all this distance back. So you are going to be able to get your graphics card perfectly positioned in the case. So because we do have the vertical GPU version of the case, we get this angled fan bracket where you're going to be able to mount 3 140mm fans on it. Now it is important to note there's no radiator support at the bottom in this case, and you can't mount 120mm fans. You've only got holes for 140mm fans. If you get the standard version of the case, you're going to get a flat bracket at the bottom. It isn't included with this version. And on that, you're going to be able to mount up to 3 120 or 3 140mm fans, or up to a 420mm radiator. So in terms of mounting fans on this bracket, you're simply going to sit your fans on top, and then you're going to use the long radiator screws that are included to screw directly down into this bracket. You can see at the bottom of the case, the fans mounted here are going to have a good source of airflow. And in the case accessory box, we get this tempered glass panel. So it's going to simply slot onto the back of the bracket, and then you're going to be able to secure it into place. You're always going to have to remove this bracket from the case to do this. The idea behind this bracket is it's going to separate the airflow going into your graphics card fans, the cool air, from the hot air coming out of the graphics card. So the airflow of the fans is going to be coming up here and into the fans of your graphics card. And the idea behind this bracket is it's going to prevent all the hot air from mixing with this cooler. And you'll notice that we do have a large dust filter at the bottom. So to remove the bottom fan bracket, there's a screw at the rear we're going to need to remove. And then we're going to simply be able to lift the bottom fan bracket up and remove it from the case. So obviously to install our motherboard, we are going to need to remove our vertical GPU bracket. So there's 3 screws at the rear to remove it. We're also going to need to remove the 2 thumb screws in the main body of the case, and then we can simply remove the bracket from the case. You can see we've got plenty of cutouts all the way around the motherboard to bring our cables through, and we've got these interesting little rubber grommets with individual compartments in them. And you'll notice we have these little rubber sliders which are going to be able to slide into place to help organize your cables. So we've already mentioned at the rear of the case you're going to be able to mount either 2 120 or 2 140mm fans, and out of the box the case comes with 120mm fan brackets installed. And then with the 4 screws removed, the bracket can be removed from the back. So like I said, 120mm fans, mount these to the bracket, and then you're going to set the whole thing in one go and install it. 140mm fans you're going to be able to set straight into place and screw them directly in. So you'll see out of the box we've got 4 storage brackets on the side of the case, but it is also possible to mount fans and radiators here. So to remove our side bracket, there is 3 screws we're going to need to remove, and then we can tilt the bracket backwards and lift it up to remove it from the case. So each storage bracket is held on with 2 screws, and then all you're going to need to do is tilt the bracket up and lift it forward to remove it. So in each of these drive brackets, you're going to be able to mount either a single 3.5-inch drive or 2 2.5-inch drives. No matter which you do, the first step is removing the 2.5-inch drive bracket. It's held on with 2 screws, and this is then going to let you slide the 2.5-inch drive bracket out. So you're wanting to go with a 3.5-inch drive, you can install it into the drive cage, and then you're going to simply secure it using the screws from the case accessory bag using these holes. If you're going with a 2.5-inch drive, you can simply slot your drive into place. And you see it's going to be these 4 holes that you're going to secure it with. You're then going to be able to take your 2.5-inch drive bracket, set your 2.5-inch drive into place and secure it using the same screws. And then you'll simply be able to slide your second drive bracket into place, and then you'll be able to put your 2 2.5-inch drives in this bracket. So with our drive cages removed, you can see we've got our fan bracket on the side, and on this you're going to be able to mount up to 3 120 or 3 140mm fans, or again up to a 420mm radiator. So our case does have a VESA mount for mounting a monitor. So you can simply set the mount into place and secure it using the 4 small screws that secured our drive brackets to the side fan bracket. So on this bracket you're going to be able to mount up to a 14-inch monitor, and according to the manual we do have 100 by 100mm and 75 by 75mm VESA mounting holes, although it does look like we've got a third set and these are 50mm apart. So this is what the case is going to look like with a 14-inch monitor installed. And I think I'm probably going to try and install this today just to see do we run into any clearance issues. So it's great to see that by opting for a screen, you are still able to install your fan stroke radiator bracket behind it with your drive tray, so you're not going to have to sacrifice your storage. So in terms of mounting the monitor to the VESA mount, unfortunately the monitor that I got didn't come with any screws, and I think this is fairly common for these monitors. I have searched through the screws that I do have, and these are M.2 thumb screws, and these work well for this particular monitor, which you'll find a link to in the description. I think the major issue you're going to have if you're going with the maximum monitor that fits in this case is actually being able to plug a HDMI cable into the top of it. So you can see here, I'm not able to actually fit this really quite slim HDMI cable in, but I do have quite long thumb screws on the back, so if I actually loosen these up quite a bit, it's going to allow me to tilt the monitor forward a little bit to get the HDMI cable to sit forward here. So your major issue is going to be plugging your HDMI cable and also your USB cables to power the monitor. We're then going to be able to route our HDMI and USB cables through to the back, and you'll notice there's a little cutout here, so we're going to be able to pass our HDMI cable and USB cables through here, obviously routing them with the cable ties, and we're then going to be able to plug our HDMI cable into our graphics card and our USB cable into our motherboard to power the monitor. So this is going to be interesting to see if we run into any more compatibility issues installing this monitor once all the other hardware's in the build. What I think I'm going to do for now is remove the monitor and we'll try installing it once we've got everything else into the PC. So taking a look at the back of the case, cable management looks like it should be really straightforward. As you've seen from the front, we have these rubber grommets which can be organised. We've also got loads of Velcro cable straps to help manage the cables. And we've also got these little stickers on, which are there to advise you of where you should route each particular cable. Another nice thing that the case comes with is two 6-pin PWM fan hubs. So you can see we've got 6 hubs here, and the white one is the one that you're going to be able to read the speeds from. In terms of the cables coming from it, we've got a SATA power cable to plug into your power supply to power the hub, and we've got a 4-pin PWM cable to plug into your motherboard, and then that's going to sync up all the fans that are plugged into the hub. And again, if we take a look down the bottom, we've got another 6-pin PWM fan hub. Taking a look at our front panel connectors, we've got our HD audio cable, we've got our USB Type-C and A cables, and we've got our front panel connectors all organised into a single cable. So you can see here we've got a sign for storage box, and another option that you have is mounting one of your hard drive cages behind the motherboard. There's 2 slots over this end that it simply slots into, and then you're going to secure it here. And our power supply is going to go down at the bottom, and the case is compatible with full-size ATX power supplies up to a maximum length of 220mm. We're now ready to start working the motherboard, and we're going to be installing our CPU, the bracket for our CPU cooler, our M.2 SSD, and our RAM before we put the motherboard into the case. So to open our socket, we need to push this lever down and out, bring it all the way to the top of the motherboard, and then we're going to be able to open our socket cover up. We can then lower our brand new Core Ultra 9 into the socket, line that up with the notches at the top and at the bottom. We'll give it a little bit of wiggle from side to side to check we're happy it's seated correctly. And once we are, we can go ahead and close our socket cover down again. We can then close the lever down, and as we do, the black bit of plastic is going to pop off, and we'll put it back in our motherboard box for safekeeping. Next, we've got our M.2 SSD, and we're going to be installed in the top slot, so we just need to push this lever down. We're going to be able to lift our heatsink up and remove it. We can remove the plastic protection, and we'll also remove the plastic protection from the back of our heatsink. We can then insert our brand new Samsung 990 EVO into the socket, and then to secure it, all we need to do is flatten it down, and the little clip will secure it in place. And then we just need to replace the heatsink. We're going to be installing our RAM in the 2nd and 4th slot along from the CPU, so we'll go ahead and open the clips on these slots. We can then take our CORSAIR DOMINATOR Titanium DDR5 and line it up with a slot. And once we're happy everything's lined up, it's just some firm pressure, and it's going to clip into place. We're now ready to install the backplate for our CPU cooler, and there's 2 different options this backplate can be installed in. Out of the box, the pins are all pushed in towards the middle, and that's for LGA 1200. If you've got an LGA 1700 or an LGA 1851 socket like we do here, you're going to want to pull these all to the outer setting. So all you're going to want to do is pull the pins all the way to the outer setting, and then they should line up with the holes in the back of the motherboard. So just a matter of lining them up, and they then should fit through. And then we're going to have one of these spacers to push onto each corner. We can then set our motherboard into the case, line it up with the standoffs at the back. And you'll notice that once the middle standoff goes through the middle hole, it's going to help hold the motherboard in place. We can then secure the motherboard into place using 9 of the motherboard screws from the case accessory box. Next, we've got our case cables to plug in. Our HD audio cable is going to go into this header down the bottom left-hand side of the motherboard. So we can bring it in through the rubber grommet at the bottom, and we'll get it plugged in with the HD audio text facing up the way. Our front panel connectors are going to go into this header down the bottom right-hand side of the motherboard. So again, we'll bring it through the cutout, and we're going to plug it in with the front panel text facing up the way. We've got a right-angled USB 3.2 Gen 1 header here, so we'll bring the cable through the cutout. We can line it up with a header and push into place. This motherboard has 2 front panel Type-C headers. The top one supports 20 gigabits per second, while the bottom one supports 10 gigabits per second, and we can also get up to 60 watt fast charging from the top slot. So if you only got one cable like we do, it makes sense to plug it into the top slot. So we'll go ahead and bring the cable through the cutout, line it up, and push into place. So our power supply is fully modular, coming without any of the cables plugged in. I've gone ahead and plugged the cables in that we're going to need for this build. So I plugged in our 24-pin motherboard cable, 2 8-pin EPS cables to provide additional power to our CPU. I've also plugged in 2 PCIe cables. One is to power our Lian Li Unifan hub, and the other is to provide additional power to our motherboard for our Type-C fast charging. And the other cable is a 12-volt type power cable to power our graphics card. So we can go ahead and set the power supply into the case with the fan facing out the way, and then we can secure our power supply into place using 4 of the power supply screws from the case accessory box. Our 2 8-pin EPS cables are going to go into these headers at the top left of the motherboard. So we can go ahead and bring our cables in through the cutout, line them up with the headers and push into place. And then we'll just organise the cables with the included cable combs. Our 24-pin cable is going to go into this header here. So we'll go ahead and bring it through the cutout. We can line it up with the socket and push into place. And then again, we'll just tidy up the cables using the included cable combs. Just below our 24-pin cable, we've got an 8-pin PCIe cable. Now plugging this cable in is completely optional. If you don't plug it in, your build is going to work perfectly well. What it does is it provides additional power for this header here and allows you to get up to 60-watt fast charging. So we'll go ahead and bring the cable through. We'll line it up with a header and push into place. And again, we'll just tidy up the cable using the included cable combs. Next, we've got our Lian Li Unifans, and we can go ahead and line the fan cables up with the fans and lock them into place. You'll notice I've got one reverse blade fan, which is going to be an intake at the bottom, and one standard blade fan, which is going to be exhaust at the top. So to get access to our fan screws, we just need to pull these little rubber pads off, and then we can set our fan brackets into place. And then we can secure them into place using the screws that came with the fans. So we can then set our standard blade fan into place at the top, and we'll secure it into place with the original screws. And then we'll set a reverse blade fan into place at the bottom. And then we just need to pass our cables through to the back of the case. So there's a hole at the top here, we can pass the cable through. And there is a small hole here, but it is a little bit too small for this large Unifan connector. A standard 4-pin PWM connector should fit. Thankfully, there is another hole up here. So we'll just route the cable up and round. I've got 3 reverse blade 140mm Unifans for the bottom, so we can go ahead and join these together, and on the end we can twist the spare connectors off, and on the other end we can add our fan cable into place. We can then set our Unifans onto our bottom fan bracket. You'll notice I've removed the rubber pads on both sides, and then we'll secure them into place using the long radiator screws that came with the case. And then we can replace the rubber pads. Just before we set our fans in at the bottom, I'm just going to pass our fan cable through to the back. Keep the cable up over the top of the fans and making sure it's not going to get caught, and lower the bracket into place at the bottom. And then we can tuck the cable round the back and out of the way. And then we can secure our bottom fan bracket into place. Okay, next thing to do is get all our cables plugged into our Lian Li Unifan hub, which comes with a triple pack of the fans. We'll get our 2 rear fans plugged into channels 1 and channel 2, and we'll plug our bottom fans into channel number 3. Then we need to power the Lian Li Unifan hub, and we've got a 6-pin PCIe cable coming from the bottom of it, and we just need to plug that into a PCIe cable coming from our power supply. The other cables that we've got coming from the bottom are a USB cable, which we need to plug into a USB 2.0 header on our motherboard, and we've also got an ARGB and PWM cable. So we'll pass all 3 of these cables through to the front and get them plugged in. We've got another 2 ARGB cables here, so we'll plug the ARGB cable in, and then right next to that we've got some system fan headers, so we'll plug the PWM cable in. And then we've got 2 USB 2.0 headers here, so we'll go ahead and plug our USB cable into one of those. So I just realised I forgot to install the glass panel at the back of these fans. Now it is obviously optional. I don't think it's going to look as well with the glass panel on, but it is meant to improve the airflow. So I will show you quickly how to do it, and I may or may not take it off at the end depending on how it looks. So we can set our tempered glass panel onto the back of the fans, and then we're going to secure it into place using the screws that came in the box with the glass panel. And then we can pop the fan bracket back into place. So that's what it looks like with a tempered glass panel installed, and as I say, the idea of this is to bring the cool air straight into your fans with all the hot air going out behind the glass and not allowing it to mix. I really don't like the aesthetics of this at all. I think it's going to catch a lot of light, and I'm having really a good looking build with hopefully a screen in it as well. So in terms of aesthetics, I'm just going to take this out. We're now ready to start working our I/O, and we do have some plastic protection on both sides of it we're going to need to remove. So now for my favourite bit of the installation, we're going to join our fans together, and they are going to attach magnetically. Just need to bring them in contact, and that's our 3 fans connected up. So in terms of powering our fans, you look at this end, we have got a female connector, and if we turn the fans around on the other side, we've got a male connector. The I/O comes with 2 different cables, and again there's a female connector and a male connector, so you are able to put your fan cables on either end. So you just need to line these up in your I/O and decide which end you want the cables coming out. So I'm going ahead and lined it up in the case, and I think the connectors are going to look best on this end here, where they're going to be hidden behind our tubes. So we've got the male connectors here, so it means I'm going to need to use the female cable, and again connecting it is completely magnetic. That's it done. Coming from the other end of the cable, we've got 2 connectors. First of all, we've got a 4-pin PWM cable, and we're going to plug that into our CPU fan header. And the other is a 3-pin 5-volt ARGB cable, and we're going to plug that into an ARGB header on the motherboard. So we can go ahead and set our fans onto the radiator, and then we're going to secure them into place using the long radiator screws. So now we come on to our pump, and coming from it we've got 2 cables. We've got another 4-pin PWM cable, and we're going to plug that into our pump header on the motherboard. And we've also got a USB cable. We plug that into a USB 2.0 cable. It's going to allow us to use Armoury Crate to control the effects on the pump screen and adjust all our fans as well. Now importantly, this screen is magnetically attached. All we need to do is pull it off, and that's going to simplify the installation process. The other thing you'll notice, so we pull the plastic protection off, is that we have thermal paste pre-applied. So we just need to be really careful that we don't damage this during the installation process. Next, we're going to have to adjust this bracket. You can see in this position there's one little notch here, but if we take the bracket and push it up the way, you'll notice now that 2 notches have appeared. Okay, so you can see the 2 notches there. For LGA 1700, 1200, and for AMD installations, you're going to want to have the 2 notches showing. For 1851, we're going to want the 1 notch, so we're just going to push this back down again, and you can see here we've got 1 notch. So for LGA 1200 and AMD installations, you're going to want to have these thumb screws pushed all the way towards the middle. For LGA 1700 and 1851, you're going to pull these all the way to the outside. We can then set our top fan bracket onto the radiator, and we'll secure it into place with the short radiator screws. Just before I set the I/O into place at the top, I'm just going to pass our fan cables through to the back, and then we can lower the I/O down into place. At the top, we can then push the bracket backwards to slide it into place, and then we can secure it with the 2 screws we removed earlier on. To help keep our cables organised going up to the top of the motherboard, I like to wrap the fan cable round the cold plate, and I'm also going to loosely route our USB cable round here as well. And then we can line the pump up with the bracket we've already installed on the motherboard. And then we can tighten up the thumb screws using a screwdriver. And then we can replace our magnetically attached screen. So I'm just going to route our USB cable through to the back, and then we can plug the USB cable coming from our pump into the motherboard. So you'll see it is really hard to see the fan headers at the top. One thing we could do is temporarily lift this radiator up to let us get plugged the cables in. So that's better. We can now see all the fan headers at the top of the motherboard. The 1/3 from the left hand side is our I/O pump header. So we'll route the cable coming from our pump up and get it plugged in. And then we'll just bring all the excess cable up towards the top of the case and pass it through the cutout to the back. The header to the far left is our CPU fan header. So we'll pass the PWM cable coming from our fans through, line it up and push into place. And also coming from our fans in the radiator, we've got an ARGB cable. So we'll bring it through the cutout at the side, line it up with the ARGB header and push into place. And then we've got some plastic protection on our screen we can remove. So you'll notice I have decided to install the tubes towards the rear of the case. The only reason for doing this is to make space for our screen. I don't think the tubes looking over the screen is going to look particularly great. But I think if you're not installing the screen on the side, I would definitely have the tubes coming to this side of the radiator, because it is going to look much better and it won't obstruct the rear fan quite as much. Okay, next thing to do is install our screen, and I plugged in our HDMI and USB cable. So the first thing I'm going to do is route the cables up to the top of the case, and then we can secure the monitor into place at the back. Then we're going to be able to route the cables along the top. We do have some Velcro cable straps to help organise them. We can bring the cables down through this cutout here, and then we're going to be able to route the cables through the cutout here. We can go ahead and plug our Type-C cable into our motherboard, pull the excess cable through to the back, and then we've got our HDMI cable ready to go when we install our graphics card. So then we can replace our side bracket. And it's good to see that this is going to fit behind the screen with all 4 of our drive trays installed. In terms of installing the drive trays, because I had used 4 of the screws to install our VESA mount, I've just secured each of the drive trays with 1 screw, and that's holding them in place nicely. So getting that screen into place wasn't the simplest. There's just about enough space for it and no more. Definitely getting the smallest HDMI cable, or one with a bit of right angle connector on it, would be ideal for this build. And you can see the reason why I've got the tubes going the other way, so they're not obstructing our screen. Okay, next thing to do is install our GPU. So I'm just going to remove the plastic protection from our riser cable on both ends. And we're going to need to remove the first 2 expansion slot brackets. One thing you've noticed I've done is I've pulled our 12-volt high power cable through here and tucked it up here, because once our graphics card's in place, it's going to be quite difficult to reach this cable through. So we can set our bracket into place, and we'll plug in our riser cable to the motherboard. So we'll line it up and push into place. And then we just need to line the bracket up. So we can put our 2 thumb screws back in loosely and replace the 3 screws at the side. Next, we need to line the graphics card up with the slot. And then we just need to plug our 12-volt high power cable into the graphics card. And then we'll pull the excess cable down. In terms of where we can mount the graphics card, there's very little travel on this bracket. It's actually installed most of the way out because our RAM is so thick. So we can just tighten up the 2 thumb screws, and we'll tighten up the thumb screw at the back as well. Then we can plug our HDMI cable coming from our internal screen into our graphics card. And we'll just pull all the excess cable through to the back. And we'll just check we can get our back panel on with all the cables installed. Okay, last thing to do is some cable management to get the panels back on again. Okay, so that's the PC complete, and all I've got to say is wow, this is without a doubt the best looking PC that I have built this year. Now, in terms of setting the PC up, if you don't know how to install Windows, the drivers, the RGB software, I've made a separate video covering all that, and you'll find links to it in the description. As well, if you don't know how to install the Lianli Unifans, I've made a separate guide to that. And I'm going to make a separate guide for this AIO, which finishes with the software installation. So you'll find links to all those videos in the description if you want to get your PC looking and running exactly the same way as I've got it here. In terms of the monitor, it ran perfectly being powered from the motherboard. All we had to do in Windows was change the orientation to portrait. I hid the taskbar, and then I set a custom background. So I do think the monitor would work better with a video on it rather than a still image. I'm just going to have to do a wee bit of searching to find one that fits in with the rest of the build theme. In terms of our temperatures, our Core Ultra 9 idled at 39 degrees and reached a maximum of 80 degrees during a 10-minute IDA64 stability test. Our RTX 4080 idled at 28 degrees and reached a maximum of 65 degrees during the stability test. We had average noise levels of 35 decibels at idle and 45 decibels under load. So I'm not planning on doing a separate review for this case. I'm saving these for pre-release versions of the case, and this case was sent to me after it had released, but I will spend a few minutes sharing my thoughts on it. So in short, I do think this case is absolutely brilliant. Build quality is super throughout the case, in particular the mechanism for taking that tempered glass panel on and off and that really tight bend that they have in it. It looks absolutely amazing. Similarly with all the other panels, the removable fan radiator brackets, the cable management at the back, I can't fault this case at all. So one area where a lot of cases fall down in terms of build quality is with vertical GPUs. No matter how good the bracket is, a lot of the times you find it is slightly pushed out from the motherboard, and that's just the effect of the riser cable being pushed up against the motherboard. It naturally tends to push the GPU out at the end. In this case, it's perfectly straight. The other thing that I absolutely love about this case is the VESA mount that is included. This is completely game changing, because if you don't get a VESA mount coming with a case and you want to put a screen in it, you're going to have to do a bit of customization yourself, and most people don't like doing this. The fact that you have got the VESA mount included, there's specifications for which monitors work. All you have to do is pick up an £80 monitor like I have, and you've got completely changed the appearance of your PC. And it is absolutely amazing how much of a difference a monitor in the case makes. So moving on to the things I didn't like about the case, and I suppose one thing is you're just going to have to be careful the order you do things in, and it mightn't be the easiest case for a beginner to start in. Particularly these rear fans, you're going to need to install those before you install the bottom fans, and you're going to have to make sure you plugged all the cables into the bottom of your motherboard before you put your vertical GPU in. And again, installing the vertical GPU in this case wasn't quite as easy as it is in some other cases. Likewise, installing that 14-inch monitor on the side wasn't the most straightforward in terms of the tolerances with the HDMI cable at the top. So if you really are going to max out the monitor, you might find it a little bit difficult to get it fitted in completely straight. The final thing I wasn't so keen on before doing the build was the fact that you could only mount 140mm fans at the bottom, and I couldn't understand why they didn't just put 120mm fan mounting holes as well. I can see the reason now. The 120mm fans wouldn't have looked great in the middle of that bracket and the holes wouldn't have lined up, whereas these 140mm fans, particularly the Liandi Uni fans with the screens on them, are absolutely stunning and a major showpiece of the build. So putting everything together, I absolutely love this case. I think it is absolutely stunning, and like I said, it's one of the best PCs that I've built in terms of aesthetics. HAVN have done an absolutely brilliant job with this case. It's not the cheapest, but if you've got deep pockets and you want a stunning PC sitting on the desk beside you, this is definitely one worth considering. If you have enjoyed this full step-by-step PC build guide, please remember to give it a thumbs up, and if you're not currently subscribed to the channel, please hit the subscribe button as well. Thanks for watching.